Hello, I'm Dr. Ala Kamerdiner. Welcome to Discrete Event Simulation. This is Lecture 8, a guided tour through Arena. I will talk about Arena components and developing simple models in Arena. Recall that last time we learned about Arena components and we talked about two types of modules in Arena, Flowchart modules and Spreadsheet modules. So the Flowchart modules were create or process, and the data modules are entity and resources. Of course, there are many more modules, but those are just some of the few modules that we learned from basic process. And there are other templates such as advanced process and advanced transfer template, and we can attach those and use them. So today we will review these and use them to build simple models. And we'll learn how to animate, run your model, and use help and other things. So let's start talking about Flowchart module called Create. The Create Flowchart module is basically a birth node for entities. That's where entities are first created, therefore the name Create. And we can create this instance. We're actually going to build a model today, and we're going to start with creating this instance of create type module with the name part arrives to the system. So you can see here, this will be the name. And if we had other create modules, which in this example we won't have other create modules, but we could have other create modules because, as you know, create as a flowchart module, so we could have multiple flowchart modules in the model, then we would need to name those other create modules different from this one, because as I mentioned earlier, each name in Arena must be unique. And to get this, you just double click on the create flowchart module and you'll get this property dialog box that is displayed here. So let me demonstrate this in Arena, and we will be building a model in Arena today, and I would like for you to just follow along. So you can see that I already started my Arena, but let me show you how to do that. So you just click on Start, and then you go to Programs, and you scroll to the Rockwell software. So here we have Rockwell software, and then you click on Arena, and here's the Arena button. So then you click on Arena button. So please go ahead and click on it. I won't because I already started it. And so we can go ahead and start building the model. So we can build the model. So go ahead and start building the model with me. So first we need to open new model, right? So you can do new here, or what I did is I just clicked on this button here and it opened a new model for me. And then next thing, what I can do is I want to use in the basic process, and if you don't have a basic process, you can click here and attach the basic process template right here. And then just click on it and open. And so you'll have this basic process template. So from basic process, you just grab the create and you drag it right here. And so now you dragged it here. You have the create module. We're gonna edit it. I double clicked on it, and now I'm gonna type in here for the name of the create module, part arrives to system. And then instead of the part, I'm going to change this entity type to from entity type 1 to part. And what it's going to create is it's going to create the entity here. So I'm going to say random, select random here, random for the time between arrivals. So my parts will be arriving every 5 minutes. So every 5 minutes, so here it was hours. It's very important, especially important to pay attention to the units. Every time when you work with the modules, you need to make sure that the units are selected correctly. So here, 5 minutes, every 5 minutes, the part will arrive to the system, and only a single part will arrive, and we will have as many as possible, infinite number of arrivals, and the first part is created at time 0. So now we're good. So we just created this new create, and as soon as we press OK, this create 1 is going to change to part arrives to the system. Notice, right now we don't have any queues, no resources, but we already have no variables either, right? All the rest of these spreadsheet modules are empty, but the entity already is there, right? You can see attribute is empty too, but the entity is there. Why is the entity there? Because we just created it as we were filling out the create module. We also created an entity called part with the picture report. So this is just one of the things that happens as we use the modules. We can create other things, right? So here we created an entity, right? So, and now the entity, remember, there is only one spreadsheet module for an entire system. And while the rest of the modules are empty, the entity module already has one row called part. So again, in this area, when you look at this, right, I wanted to tell you that the important part is all of this, right, to be filled out correctly in according with what your model want to do, right? So you can see here that time between arrivals, right, it tells us different arrival. Typically it's random, but we could have a schedule, constant, or some kind of expression, right? So that's basically the distribution. Tells us about distribution of how the time values are distributed. So here is a random exponential, which you're most often gonna have this. And then entities is also very important because entities per arrival actually tells you of how many is created during each arrival, right? And so this is a maximum number of arrival. If you want to choke off arrivals, right, after so many arrival, we can change it to some number or some expression here. So if you wanted to, we can build expression, or we can just write the number here, right? Should be an integer number. And again, the first creation, typically 0 at the time of when the first entity will arrive, but it doesn't have to be 0. All right, great. So the next thing we want to do, right, is to look at the entity data module, as I mentioned, right? There is only a single data module here, and this is the row that we have. And so we can only edit it in a spreadsheet view. So we can change, for example, right, and change the pictures, and we can replace this picture with something else, right? So maybe a widget, because it's a part. Let's change the initial picture to a widget, or if you want to, you can change it to something else, for example, blue ball, right? So now we have blue ball as initial picture. And if you wanted to, right, we can also edit pictures. You can go to edit and then entity pictures, and then that's where we gonna be able to edit the pictures. So for now, I'm not gonna do much of the changes, right? This is a report picture, right? That's what it would be originally, but we changed it, right, to this picture right here. And then if you wanted to, you can move it here and then work on it and then change it back. So for now, we're not going to edit any of it. I just demonstrated this capability. So the next thing to do is to add the process flowchart module. So let's go ahead and first select this and be selecting it so that when we drag the process flowchart module, it will automatically be attached to our previous module, which is this create module that we selected. So now, notice, right, I'm moving it, and here's my process. Again, I'm going to double click on it, And notice as soon as I grabbed it and pulled it, now we also see this in the flowchart view, but let's edit it through the dialog. So to edit it through the dialog, we're gonna double click on it again, and then here the name is gonna be drilling press, and what we're doing is we're basically recreating a model 3.1 from the book. Sorry, drilling press. Or actually, drilling press is going to be the resource. Let's put drilling center, and this is going to be the name, and then the action is going to be SeizeDelayRelease. And we want to have, right, so there's another thing that we have is the standard, but it could be a submodel, right? It's up to us, and if we selected a submodel, then it would also be, right, if we selected a submodel there, then in the navigate, we could also use the submodel, right? And we could choose, right, either define the model, sublogic, right, or to close the submodel view, but that's later on. For now, we're just going to be using standard. And so here, right, standard also reports statistics because I want to know about statistics regarding the process center. And these statistics will tell us about utilization, queue lengths, queue waiting times, and so on. And so the next thing, right, is this logic area. So this logic area is very important. It's in a way it's similar to the inter-arrival time area that we saw in the create module. So now in this logic area, right, we're editing the process, right? It will change after we are done. It will change to drilling center. In this logic, we selected action SeizeDelayRelease. If we had the delay as it was before, right, then it's a very simple action. It would just delay the entity, like example red traffic light. But there will be no resources, and notice no resources, no queuing. It will just sit there for a time duration. The entity would just be sitting there, right? If we selected instead SeizeDelay, right, there is no release, right? But if you selected, right, you still would need to add the resource. And importantly, somewhere later in your flow charting, right, in this flowchart view, somewhere later downstream, you would need to include a release module. And the release module, you would look for it in the advanced transfer model. And another option would be delayed release, right? In that case, you know, resources needed to be seized upstream, right? So before, between the create and the process, there was supposed to be a seize somewhere before. Then it would just delay and release, right? And so again, in our case, typically at the beginning, you would be just using either delay or SeizeDelayRelease. And in later times, when we start using advanced process, then the other two you might use for more detailed modeling. So now we'll have the drill. We're going to be seizing the drill, so it's going to be SeizeDelayRelease. So rather than just waiting, we'll need to have a queue, right? And the drill will be used as a resource. So we need to define the resource, right? So we're going to add the resource, and the name for the resource is going to be drill press and we need to also define the quantity, right? The quantity of units to be seized, right? So this actually tells us how many of units is going to be seized. So, and one part is going to seize only one drill press. So it's very important to remember that this quantity, right, is not a capacity. It's the number of resource that one entity will seize. So one entity will seize one drill press. So we added that, and then, right, so this is how many, this quantity here is how many are required for processing of one entity, right? Very different from the overall capacity. So don't get those confused. That's very important. So the next thing is to look at the delay type and to find, right, to fill out that information. Now let's go ahead and take a look at delay type. So delay type is where we choose the probability distribution, constant or general. We can also select expression. So you can see here, right, we're gonna select triangular, but we could select among other distributions, including constant value. And the constant, if it just arrives at all the time at a constant rate. So we'll have it random, we'll select a triangular distribution, that's a random distribution. And the units is currently in hours. Remember, it's very important to put the correct units there, right? So make sure that we select minutes. So it's going to be in minutes. And we have allocation as value added. And allocation tells us how to charge the delay in costing. And we'll talk about it more later. And there's other possibilities in terms of allocation, including non-value added, transfer weight, or other. But typically we're going to have value added. And then here in terms of triangular distribution, it has 3 parameters. If we selected, for example, normal distribution, you know normal distribution has 2 parameters, the expectation and the standard deviation. So we would have 2 parameters here. But triangular has 3 parameters. So the minimum is going to be 1 minute. The most likely is going to be 3 minutes, and the maximum is going to be 6. And so this is just the parameters for our distribution, and we'll also select to report the statistics. As soon as I select OK, it will also change the name for my process. So notice before it was process 1, now it's drilling center. And notice also, remember how I showed you that when we added this, the only thing that was non-empty was entity right after we added the create module. Now that we added the process module, and that process module, notice we define this resource drill press. So the resource before was empty. Now if you click on it, it now has this drill press here, and we can change and edit this resource as we wish. So resource data module is important. So if you look at the resource data module, it's created when we selected stuff in the process. So we now have this drill press, which is a resource. The type is also important too, because we can change it. And later on, I'll show you how to change the resource utilization based on the schedule. Not utilization, sorry, capacity. But typically, we'll start with a fixed capacity. And here we have a capacity which tells us the number of units of this resource that exist. So if we wanted to increase the capacity, we could have 2 drill presses. Then it will have more drill presses here, right? You can just type in the whatever value you want to. Instead of 1, you can choose 2 or 3, or as we initially had 1. Another important part is the failures. Right now we don't have any failures, but if you wanted to, you can click here on failures, double click, and then adding the failures here, right? And then having the failures and the failure rules. For now, we're not going to have it, so I'm just going to delete the row, and we won't have the failures. And we can specify the different cost for resource being busy or being idle, and collect some of those statistics as well. So another thing, notice not only resource has been populated, right? So not only resource spreadsheet or data module has been populated, but the queue data module is now also has something there. So as soon as we did that, right, and added this resource and had the seize, in the process we had SeizeDelayRelease, because we're seizing something, we need to have the queue, right, where the entities will be waiting. So you can see, right, we can double click here and get the dialog box and edit it there, or we can edit it from the spreadsheet view. And so the type is first in out, but you can change it to some other. And first in out, it's your typical queue, how it forms normally, but other rules could be used as well based on lowest or highest attribute value. And in this case, right, it's basically, right, first in, first out. It's the lowest time, arrival time, right, or arrival time to the drilling process, right? And here, right, could be last in, first out. That's a reverse order. So we could select any of these. And we can also have shared queues if you want to share the queues with some other process. But in this case, we just only have one process and we're not going to share it with anything. Again, we can select report statistics or not select report statistics. Right, that's where we're going to save the information. And the reporting statistics will also check, we'll have it checked for automatic collection for some of the important statistics on the queue, such as queue length or time in queue. And additional things that happened is you might have noticed that as we selected SeizeDelayRelease instead of just delay, that was by default, this animation of the queue occurred. So this is when you click on this is the animation for the drilling center queue. Right here, right, if I click, touch on it, you can see queue identifier drilling center dot queue. So because the drilling center process has a seize in it, right, it also created this automatic animation, but I can also create the animation for the queue from here, right? Example, if I just deleted this, I could then add it, right, select the identifier, right, and then create my drilling center queue, and then can move it to be positioned right next to the resource, right, or could lift it, could change some of the properties, could make it maybe more straight. Of course, not as good as automatically created, so let me just but basically it's the same thing, right? So because it's just not as straight, let me just change it back to what we had automatically. But if you accidentally delete it, there's a way to redo this by using the animation tool button. So while there is automatic animation for the queues, we don't get any automatic resource animation. So instead, we can actually do a similar thing and use this animation button for the resource. So notice if I come close to it, it tells me that's a resource animation. So I select identifier, drill press, that's our resource. And then I can actually change, these are the default states for different states, or I can change it by selecting a different library. So PLB extensions are the library files for the animation for different pictures. So they are actually found in by going to program files, Rockwell, and Arena. So again, just to reiterate, program files, Rockwell, Arena. And so you'll get there, and it's different. We go to program files rather than documents. So now you go to select machine library. So you can see there's basic process, which is a current things that you would see on your basic process. There's equipment, and we can also select machines. So let's select machines. So now I selected machines, and I can find here a drill press. So let's say this is gonna be when it's busy. So I'm also selecting busy, and then I'm gonna choose to copy this. And so I'm replacing this with a busy. And then for the when it's idle, it's gonna be like this. So I selected idle here, and I selected this as a picture for idle. So I'm gonna replace this. So it's gonna be for idle. and I could have inactive, for example, this could be an inactive and this could be failed if I wanted to replace it, or I could just do some other things. So we don't really have failed, so inactive or failed is not going to be used in the model, so I'll just use it as it is. And so I do OK, and then I can place it here somewhere, right? So I place it, and if I wanted to move it a little bit, I can move it. So this is going to be my animation for the drill press resource. And if I wanted to edit it later, I just double click on the picture, and then I can change. If I don't want this to be the idle and instead want to have some other picture for it, I just go ahead and change it here again, but I don't really care about changing it. But if I wanted to, all I need to do is just double click and I can change it later. So the next thing I want to do is to add a dispose flowchart module. And in order to, if I don't select, right, in order for me to connect to it, I would need to select this drilling press center. But let's say I forgot to select this drilling center, then I can just drag it and it wouldn't connect. Right? So the dispose is necessary so that it's disposed, but right now if I try to run my model, it wouldn't work because there's no link between drilling center to the dispose. And so it wouldn't be correct. Well, let me demonstrate. There's an error creating the module validation file, right? So it's not really correct. Also reminds me to save the model, so let's go ahead and save this model. So I just clicked on save as, file save as, and for file save as, I selected my folder where I'm saving all my models, and this is going to be my model 301 from the book, from Arena book. And so I saved it, but now I still need to connect it, right? Because remember, it told me it cannot generate the validation file. So to connect, I need to connect from the drilling center to the dispose center. So now that they're connected, there is a way for entities to move through. But before I run the model, I also want to change the model for the dispose module and do some of that. So to change it, I can either click on it and change it here, or I can double click and edit it here. So because we already used the dialog before, let me do it a little differently. So instead, I can click here and I can type there part leaves system. And notice as I finish this, right now it's still dispose 1, but as I finish it, it's going to change. And so now you can see this says part leaves system. And right, again, I can check here, right, to record entity statistics. I want to know what's going on with entities, right? So I will check to record the statistics on the entities. And most times, right, those are turned on by default. And there's no really much to do here, just to say yes. So the only thing, right, that when you select everything, sometimes the models can be executed much slower when you record statistics that you don't really need. So if you have speed problems, then you can clear the statistics that you are not interested in, but make sure to leave the statistics that you want to know, right? Because there are some statistics that you really want to know because that tells you the information about performance of the model. And another thing to do is to create these dynamic plots, which basically will help us do some of the animation of the data, and so they will appear during the simulation and get populated and then disappear after each run ends. And so we can also save the data if you wanted to, and we can plot, use this plot button right here, dynamic plot button, to animate the plots right from the animate toolbar. And so what we want to do, right, is we want to add the two plots just like in the model 3.1. So now I'm gonna click on the plot button to add the plots, and here in data series, so we first click on data series. We can also click in terms of the titles and add the title. For example, in the header, right, I can change the header text here and change this. This is going to be my drilling center Q. Oops. Drilling center Q. Number weighting. So after I've changed it, now it will have above the plot, I'll have this header. If I wanted to change it to a footer, right, I would need to change footer and then put the footer information in the footer there. For this plot, I won't have the footer. So next, and most importantly, I need to add data series. So when I add the data series, I need to change my data series name, right? So I don't want it to be series 1. I'm gonna instead name it as drilling center Q, number weighting, and that might be a little too long, so actually I could change it to some shorter name as well. And so later I can go back and change it, or I can change it now, but first let's do this as well. Actually, let me put let's just put the length of drilling Q length as a shorter name. And here I can put the expression. I can build the expression by putting here, right, or I can change drilling, right, and select some of the ones that we already have. So let me show you how to build the expression here, because I want an drilling Q length, the number weighting in the drilling Q. I go and the Qs are found in the basic process panel. I go and select basic process right here. Then after I click on basic process, right, it shows me what kind of different modules we have in the under basic process, or different variables. So I'm interested in the Q, so I'm going to select the Q, and then current number in the Q, and then here if I had multiple Qs, this is where I select specific Q. So now that I selected it, it created this expression for me. So now I got the number in the Q, which is drilling center Q, and here I can also change the color for the line, and I can change the drawing mode. So say from the point to point, I can change to the stair plot, because as you saw in the previous lecture, right, if we track the number in the Q, it becomes this stair plot. So I selected the stair plot. I can change also the type of lines that I want to create. So I want just a solid line, right? And I want this color, but I could have changed it to black color, any other color. So I'll just select whatever color I want, right? So let's say I choose the black color instead, and so it can plot my hue here. It can also fill, right? If I want to, I can select the fill, and it can create some fill for me with some type of grading if I wanted to, or it can have a solid fill, and I can change the color again. Let's say I want some kind of gray color maybe, and so right, that creates this coloring for me if I wanted to, right, to show what's the area under the hue also. So this is for now, right? We're just gonna finish with this. I can also put the different things or change other things if I wanted. So we got through the fill, we got through the line, we have the vertical axis. We can also change the things on in terms of the axis as we want to, and we can scale those up as well. And so, for example, so this is for the grid lines. We can change the grid lines as well. We can put different labels on it and change the scale for the axis. Change the titles for the axis as well if we needed the titles for the axis. So let's say this is my time x properties. If I select time y, y properties, let me change the number here to the scale, reduce the scale, because we don't expect to have this many, right? So maybe let's change it to 6, right? So we expect to have a small hue, right? We could change it to 6. We can change the increments also to 1. See how that works for us. And then we can put the plot where we want it to be. So maybe right underneath here, we're going to have our plot. And so now we have the plot. We can also add another plot if we want to. And this could be the plot for the drill press, whether it's busy or not. So, and when it's busy, we're going to also plot this step plot. So as before, let's start, before I forgot, let's start with the title. And we're going to have both a header and a footer. And first in the header, we're going to change the header text to drill press number busy. And then for the footer, we're gonna see how it appears here, number busy. For the footer, we're gonna select the footer, and then for footer text, we're gonna change the text here from the footer text to time in minutes. And then we still need to select the data series. So we're gonna add, so notice, right, the titles is gonna be like this, which what we want. And then for data series, we're gonna add data series. For this is gonna be my drill press number busy, and then I can change my mode from point to point to the stair plot, because the number busy just is kind of like utilization, and we saw that's going to be a stairs plot, so we want to plot it as a stairs plot. We can change the color, maybe again to black, and if you want to have the fill, we can have the solid fill, for example, and we can change from red color to whatever other color we want, maybe another gray, and so this takes care of things, except for we still need to take care of the axis. So let's take a look at the axis. Let's grab the value y-axis. So this vertical axis, we know that we only have one press right now. It's from 0 to 100. It's not gonna draw a nice plot for us, so we need to reduce the scale and reduce the scale maximum to 2, and by 1, that way we'll get a nicer plot. So I think that's pretty much it. I probably didn't forget anything. So now again, I'm gonna draw it right under the other one and try to make it about the same. Probably would be easier if I had the grid points, but since I didn't, we'll just work with this. So you can see this is my drill press with a number busy, there's a time, right, there's my values. So let's go ahead and save this model, and after we're done with the scaling, right, and we change the most of the stuff for the plots, right, we could do other things to dress up the plots for now, but you know, I'll let you play with it. We're gonna, before we run the model, we want to also change the setup, so we can name our project, right, and so instead of a named project, it's gonna be model 0301 arena textbook project. Again, the analyst name is gonna be Dr. Alla Kammerdiner, and our project description is gonna be parts arrive and are arrived at the drilling center and are processed by the drill press or on the drill press before leaving the system. And again, right, you could have wrote something else. So again, we're gonna collect statistics for entities, resources. We're gonna collect the queues. If you wanted for processes, I could also select the processes, but I'm not gonna do that. We don't have any tanks, transporters, stations, or conveyors, so we're not gonna select any of that. Another thing that we can do is check some of the other parameters. So that's the next thing we're gonna do, is select our parameters. So as I said, we need, very importantly, right, we need the replication parameters. So the replication parameters is a key part here in terms of parameters. And so the number of replications is how many identical or similar replications of the same model is gonna run, right? So it's kind of similar to realizations, right? If you run a single replication, it just only gives us one realization of the process. If we run 10 replications, means we're gonna get 10 realizations of the same process. So in this case, we're just gonna have one replication, but typically we're gonna have multiple replications. We would have, and again, it depends on, later we'll talk about it, depends on what are the goals for our model, because sometimes you'll still use one replication, but long replication, and we'll talk more about it later. For now, let's just select one replication. We will initialize between replications both statistics in the system, and typically it's selected by default, but that's very important. If you don't initialize variables between the replication and you have multiple replications, then your replications are going to be dependent on each other. So initialization takes care of this dependency and makes the replications independent. So it's very important. And then here you can schedule the start for the replication to run, but we're not going to do that. And that's actually for later, for things that we typically do, right? We don't need to do that. And warm-up period is whether we need something to warm up the system before we actually start counting the statistics, right? If we have a warm-up period, maybe part of it we're not going to count for our statistics. So in this case, we're just going to set up warm-up period to 0. So at the beginning, we're going to keep always the warm-up period to 0. And very importantly, we need to keep attention, right, or pay attention to time units. So for warm-up period, the time units are minutes. For 0, it doesn't really matter, but if we had a non-zero time period, positive time period, we need to make sure we specify correct units. At replication length, if we just try to do infinite, it will never end, our replication never end unless we specify some terminating condition here. So in this case, we're just going to have some short replication, not 20 hours, but 20 minutes. So we need to change the units here to minutes. So it's going to be 20 minutes. And then we're going to run it for 24 hours per day, but you could select something different, right? If we needed multiple, if you're running long for multiple days, it could be something different in terms of number of hours per day. And importantly, we need to select base time units, and that's going to be minutes too. And so if we selected minutes, but here still was hours, then the replication length will still be hours. So it's important to pay attention to all of the time units, as I mentioned before. And in this case, you're not going to have any terminating condition, but that's where you could build some kind of expression and specify, when you want to stop the model. So again, at this point, we are good to go, and we can run our model. So as you can see, right, it plotted the drill press queue, right? And we can see the results of our model. So now for our model, we could see different type of statistics. And the half width is going to be insufficient because it's a short replication and we don't have the things, right, that we did, right, that we don't have the multiple replications, we only have a single replication, so it's going to be insufficient in terms of half length, but it does provide us information about the average, right, also gives us a maximum value and the minimum value, and those are useful, right, tells us information for the queue, tells us information in terms of utilization of the resources such as drill press. So another thing that we could do, as I mentioned, right, so let's say we're done with the report, we need to close it. If we stop it, right, it clears off our plots. Let's actually go ahead and increase it a little more in terms of zooming it in. It doesn't seem to zoom in well. Let's try to zoom in. So in this case, right, we didn't define any named views, right? So in order to have those, right, we need to first have to define the views, right, before we can show some or be able to create the view, right? So, but we could choose all two, right, and that just selects the whole thing from there, and then alternatively I can go back to where I want this to be. Oops, too far. So another thing that I can do is slow down in terms of the speed, right? I can slow down my run, and so, right, this is the time units per frame, right? So I could adjust animation factor, right, in terms of animation speeds, right? So I can increase animation delay, right, or animation speed factor. So if I wanted to increase the animation delay, right, I could do that as well. So let's say I change it to this, right, and then do OK. Then now my animation is going to run slower, so I can have here run and go, right, and that will go. Or I can click here, and that's the same thing. It also will run my animation. Right, so still kinda, so let's say no. Something that I forgot was this drill press that I probably did not do. So let's see what was wrong with the drill press. I forgot to define the expression for the drill press, right? So notice, right, it did draw my number waiting, but didn't draw my drill center queue, and moreover, right, we only run to 20 minutes, right, so we don't need this to be 200. So we can change the axis, and more importantly, I need to change, right, so I'm editing this plot here for drill press number busy. So what I need to do is create the expression, right, so let's cancel it. The reason why I cannot edit it is because I didn't add my simulation. I need to end my simulation, and then I will be able to edit my plot. So I double click on it, and again, right, it doesn't have, when I click on data series, it does not have the expression for data series. So I need to build this expression. I click on build expression, and what do I build it for? For drill press. Drill press is a resource, and the resource located in the basic process panel. So it's very important to know different type of modules, and also important to know where they're located. This is drill press, this is a resource, and this resource is located, we got that resource from the basic process. So I click on the basic process. If it wasn't open, then I click on resource, and then I select the usage, and then I want current number busy, so here's current number busy. And then if I had multiple resources, this is where I pull down to select the correct resource. So we have drill press, right, so this is my current expression. So when I do that, now when I run, I will actually have the plot. But I also am not happy with the time scale, because time scale runs to 100, but my simulation only runs to 20 minutes. So there's no need for that additional time. So I'm gonna change my time axis. So I'm gonna select the time axis here, and then I'm gonna change the scale for the time axis from 100 of maximum 100 to 20, and maybe I'll change this by 5. All right, so now as I do that, see how it changes it. So that's gonna be much nicer. And I'll do the same thing for the drilling center queue. So I'm gonna double click on that, and I'm gonna select again the axis. If it wasn't selected before, I can click here on time axis, and I'm gonna change my scale again to 20 from 100, and maybe here I also want to have by 5, but if you wanted to have by 1, that's fine as well. So here now it looks much better. And another thing I can do, right, so let's say I'm gonna reduce this in terms of the scaling factor, right? And maybe actually selecting all instead, so view and then views all. That gives me, right, my view, maybe even smaller, to 66, even better. Okay, so now I have this. I changed it. If I want my run to slow down even more, I can slow down or increase the animation delay to several seconds. Let's say 2-second delay. Okay, and now run it, and we can see what's gonna happen. Oh, it's still too slow. Let's maybe not see the result. Let's maybe run it even slower. So here I changed it to 10 seconds per frame, and it runs just a little more noticeable. So I'm not interested in the results, right? I just want to show you there is another alternative, is you can do step by step, right? And notice just one part arrived, then it goes to the drilling center, then, right, it's in the drilling center, a second part arrived, and so you can see how as it goes by, it also changes the plots, right? So we can change the plots through, and pressing, we've finished through the entire, right? And we can look at the result again, but we already have watched them, so I'm just gonna go ahead and say no for now, right? And I remind you that every time you run through, you need to say end. If as you're running, you can also pause it here, right? Or you can start over, and so on. Right, so there are some important things, right? If you ran through something and you said no, and later you want to review the reports, you can go back here and select whatever report you want to do. By default, you're shown category of review report, right? And you can click on the category of review. You can browse through pages, and so you can go through and browse through pages. It tells you about some statistics. It changes, right, as you go through, right? You can see different, or you can click here and you change and pick specific things. For example, if you wanted to know the waiting time in the queue, you go to queue and then time and then waiting time, and here it zooms in on the waiting time for you, and below here you see the statistics for the waiting time. So if you wanted to, you can look at some other things as well. For example, for entity, you can look at the time, wait time for the entity. That's the statistics here for you. And so the next thing, I want to talk about is the types of statistics that are being reported. So in the report that we saw, all the times that you saw in the report, right, it just had the time next to it. It didn't have any units. Well, the units are whatever you selected in the as a base unit in the parameters there, right? So it's important when we selected the specific run parameters, right, that you selected the correct base time units. So it's very important, right, in those replication parameters that you select in the replication parameters correct base time units, and you know what they are when you read the reports. And another important part is to know the differences between the statistics, right, the types of statistics. And so this, of course, you know, I'm going to test you on that a lot. So this is an important information that I want you to know regarding the different types of statistics. Right, so very many output statistics are one of three types, and you need to be able to distinguish between those three types. So the first type is tally, and tally is basically a statistic that is average, maximum, or minimum of a discrete list of numbers. Right, so you have a sequence of numbers, and then you select, you know, out of the discrete list of numbers. For example, the waiting times, right? The waiting times in queue for an entity. So the waiting times in queue for different entities, you have so many entities that pass through during the model, right? You get the list, right? Because it's indexed by the entity index. And so when you look at the average waiting time for an entity, right, or average cycle time, which is the total time spent in the system, that's your example of a tally, right? So total time in the system, right, is one of the examples. The time persistent is different. Time persistent is a time average, right? It's a time average. It's a maximum minimum of a plot of something, whereas the x-axis is a continuous time. So that would be, for example, the number in queue, right? The time average number in queue, or the maximum number in queue, right? So you look at this also like queue length, right? The work in process, the server busy functions such as utilizations, they're all continuous time output processes. So those type of statistics are time persistent statistics. And the third very important part of output statistic is a counter. And counters are accumulated sums of something, and usually just nose counts of how many times something had happened. And often they're used to count entities passing through a point in the model. So another important information I wanted to talk to you about the reports and their files. All of the reports are based on Microsoft Access database, right? So each time after you run your model, you can see that the Arena creates this Microsoft Access database file, and it is saved and it can be viewed later. You can also view it within Arena using Crystal reports to query Access database. And Arena also produces a plain text summary report called .out. So if you go to that folder where you just ran the model, and I'll show you, it will produce this .out file. And another thing that it generates .html report, right? And you can go tools model documentation report to find the report as well. So here I opened this file, right, called IE467 model. It's not a file, sorry, a folder. So I opened this folder on my computer where I saved our model, right? So this model has the extension .doe. So every Arena model has this extension .doe. And then notice what we have here, right? We have some information here, and also this our Microsoft Access database files, right? So you can see Microsoft Access files, right? So MDB specifically, right, as the access that we could open in the Microsoft Access and view that file. There's a program file, right, that is a MATLAB P code, right, for the model. And there's also this out file that I promised you, that's a text file. It also created, remember last time we generated the report for the model, right, through the documentation for the previous model, for demo model. So it created the HTML document file for us because we generated that report, right? If we did the same thing for model 3, we would get also the HTML file. So now, right, I closed off the report and I'm back in Arena, and here I wanted to talk a little bit about the tools menu. So Arena organizes things by menu, as we know. File, edit, view, tools, arrange, object, run, windows, and help are all important menus there. And I want to specifically point your attention to tools because this is where we're going to use a lot of those interesting additional applications. So there are some separate applications for modeling and analysis, including input analyzer. And the input analyzer is used to fit probability distributions for input using field collected data, so it's a separate application. Then there's the process analyzer. It's also useful. It's used to for the output analysis, right? So input analyzer for statistical analysis of input, while process analyzer analyzes the output and actually allows us to compare many scenarios at once. And there is another thing that we can do, which is output analyzer, that you need to use the start menu to open. It's not in the menus because the output analyzer is a separate application that you start, not from the menu, but from the start menu. And then another thing that we have is this opt quest, which allows us to optimize our simulation and rerun and do very many many more runs than process analyzer allows us to do, and find the optimal. So again, right, the model documentation report that we can generate here, right? So if I click, right, then I select what I want to generate, then it generates my report as HTML file. So I'm not gonna do that. Instead, actually, I'm not going to do that, so I put cancel. Instead, I also want to talk about a few other things on the tools menu, which is import and export. So you can import model to export model to database, or import model from database. And that actually allows you to save model details to Excel or Access. And you can capture video as you run your model. You can record video of your model simulation, and then you can create macros or macro. You can record macros, or you can create a macro, right? Edit through the Visual Basic editor. So that will could be used to automate it, right? So if you want to learn more, there's more about it in Chapter 10. And this is another very useful tool. There's another thing that I want to show you is object menu. And the object has these connect tools, right? The auto connect, the smart connect, animate connectors, right? A lot of those things are through the objects that you can do, including the submodel, right? You can add a submodel somewhere through the object. So you can add a submodel, right, and decide where you want to add the submodel. So this is very useful, especially when we start building larger models. So now I don't want to do that, so I just cancel it. But you can do a lot in terms of that, right? So if you need to add the submodel, go through the objects menu. So now you're ready for your lab, so you will be using it in your next lab. So I hope this has been very helpful for you. Thank you.